is TWiP. Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of This Week in Photo. I am your host, Frederick Van Johnson. Today I have a longtime friend of mine on the show, twisted his arm to come on here to give us an update on some things that are going on over at HDR Soft. You may have heard of HDR Soft. They're the company that's behind a piece of software called Photomatix, which is HDR software. So Ron Pepper is one of the guys that works at the company. He's in the know. He knows everything there is to know about what's happening with this software and this most recent revision or update and what that means to photographers everywhere. So I wanted to get Ron on the show to talk about it, give us the ins and outs of not only the software and this update in the software, but I also wanted to just shoot the breeze with him about the state of the HDR space. You know, we all remember a couple of years ago, several years ago, there was a big spike in HDR usage. Everyone was doing HDR photos, all the things, right? It's still going really strong, but things have shifted a little bit. So I want to put a finer point on that and find out kind of a state of the industry as it pertains to HDR. So with that, welcome to the show, Ron Pepper. How's it going, man?
Hey, Frederick. My arm is completely recovered from all the twisting, and you know me, I can sit and talk about photography all day long. So yeah, let's do it. I'm happy to be here.
I love it. So my Jedi mind trick is still working. Thank you. So you're here. So, you know, first of all, before we dive into the discussion about the software Photomatix and the company and the industry and all that, give us a little background on who Ron Pepper is. Like, what kind of photographer do you do, and what's your function over at HDR Soft?
Well, for my own photography, I like to say that I'm into the turning gray hair years. So I've been around doing a lot of things for a long time, but my main specialty has been 360 degree panoramic photography. And that I was doing that back when it was hard to do. And it is related because it got me into HDR early on. This would have been about, about 2005, give or take. And we were looking for a solution to lighting because the 360 degree scene is still really difficult to light. But back then we didn't have all these cool battery powered strobes and stuff. So you couldn't do a lot of creative lighting. You really had to do something else. So I started taking brackets even before it was really HDR, and just compositing them and doing all kinds of tricks. And then Photomatics comes along and initially solved that problem of where HDR was really in the 3D space. People would use it for lighting information. It wasn't really in the photography space yet. Mm-hmm. Photoshop tried to bring it to photography, but even their first attempt wasn't really intended for photographers. We all wanted it to be, but it wasn't. And that was where actually Photomatics was born, just to work in that history. So in that mid 2000s, then they really kind of responded to the demand of somebody all the photographers wanting to use it. And I'm always proud to say that the 360 degree, the panoramic photographers helped shepherd that into photography, because the main creator, the genius that, wherever HDR is today, it was kind of born into the photography world back then with the person that made Photomatics first. And that was pushed by 360 photographers were really asking for it. And I could tell you more detail about who those people were, but
take us back even further than that. So for the folks that may not even know what HDR is, high dynamic range photography, or HDRI, high dynamic range imaging, what does that mean? Like, what is the technique doing for us?
Oh, going to go right into the technical. Yeah.
Of course.
The original, before photographers were using it, it was a process, and being in the 360 world, I was part of that in some ways. What you do is take photos of bracketed sequences. So when the camera can't capture all of the light in one shot, all of the brightest and all the darkest, there's a lot of situations for that. Initially, when someone wanted to make 3D spaces, they would need the lighting information, just the lighting information, no color or anything. You could take brackets and you could use those to create a 32-bit file that's a true HDR file. It's a 32-bit. It can't be displayed on screens, even though these days there are some they're starting to come out where soon the normal person will probably be able to view 32-bit files on screens. But back then it was just for the use would basically be you make a 3D space and you use the lighting information. So let's say you create a 3D car and it's very reflective and you want to drive through a scene. And so you have your 3D object, put it into like Maya would be the software, I think. And then the car might drive down through a garage, let's say, and you want the reflections of the lights to be correct. So all that would come from an HDR file that has the lighting information. It's just data. So it knows where the light is coming from. So you can get a realistic reflections. So that's where it really was used back in those days. And then, so from my own history, I started in, at least professionally, I became a photographer in the early 2000s. Really, before that, it was all hobby. And it really mattered to me for what I did. I would go do virtual tours and stuff. And again, back when those were hard, now you can get like 3D cameras or 360 cameras that are pretty amazing. Like I can still do better with my DSLR gear and rotate and take a lot of time to do it, but I can also get a pretty good 360 from single shot cameras. So, and then just to wrap up the part about me, and we can kind of talk about HDR more in general. But over the years, of course, I've branched out into different things, and I did a lot of real estate photography in those 2000s, the aughts, and then I'm kind of back into that now. And in between that, lots of 360s, hotels, other 3D things. Like a lot of stuff I do, I always lament that a lot of stuff that I do doesn't really get seen because it goes into someone else's bigger project of a 3D space, like right out by you. I don't know if I should give that away, but I did a bunch of photography that turned into 3D so that they could sell commercial real estate that wasn't there yet because they used the space the images that I had. They created the 3D space and then they put in the Amazon shipping centers and stuff like that, and put all that in virtually so they could see what was going to happen next. So are you telling me you're the one that's responsible for this gigantic Amazon distribution center I have? Yeah, I did. Are we saying exactly where you are? I don't know. But yeah, somewhere an undisclosed location in California is where I am. I mean, for anyone out there, we do know each other in real life. We could have done this in person, really, but I did. Right. Yes, it is that Amazon center right next to you. Before it was an Amazon center, I was over there doing stuff for the commercial real estate stuff. So that's cool. Cool. And I'm actually really excited because I'm back into shooting stuff like portraits and things that are just the old fashioned way, and getting back into, I would call it true, even though I'm really into HDR, I do use lighting to photograph people and doing some sports and things. So yeah, the photography world is really fun right now. I do a handful of different things, but this from the most experience is the 360 and HDR, and they go together. Like I've been working with HDR software that makes Photomatics for a long time, but it's because I was already back then we used to call it a power user. Do we still use that term? I just kind of got involved and started helping with customer stuff, and started helping with things like this, just like a chance to do. And this is great because it gives a chance to promote a little bit, because this company doesn't do a bunch of marketing and doesn't want to bombard customers with a bunch of marketing material and stuff. So getting out there and just talking about what's going on with it is great. Yeah, it is great. Yeah. And I enjoy our conversations, for a variety of reasons, but one of them is you and I tend to geek out and talk about emerging technologies. Like you were literally the first person many, many years ago to clue me in on, hey, you should probably start paying attention to this crypto thing, right? Yeah. And then more recently we were just shooting the breeze about AI, and so we have that level of conversation, which is always fun. I always come away thinking like, yeah, that's right, this stuff is going to be big. I might be from the future. Like, I don't know, we know our history of important things that happened in the past, but we don't have I don't think we all have a good gauge of the context of when those things happened in relation to each other, and how much time there were between like I remember when I was a kid, they explained like in the Bible, all these stories happened like thousands of years apart or something like that. I can't remember, a long time apart. It's not like this is all happening normally. And then in our let's just call it like let's say our U.S. history or something. We know a lot of stories, but we don't know how far apart they were. And I feel like that right now. Like I really feel like I can see things that are really important, that are coming, that are happening, but I don't know when. I don't know exactly. If I could predict exactly when, then I don't would have a whole different life. But
Right.
the some of the important things that are going on, like with the AI and the NFTs, and in fact, sometime I want to do another thing with you, maybe about NFTs, what they really are, because all the hype is not important. Before they were called NFTs, we were already talking about intellectual property via blockchain and stuff like that. And so it's all coming. I just can't tell the timing of it.
Yeah, yeah. And then back to just sort of HDR and the definition of it. Correct me if I'm wrong. My definition, or my internal thinking of what high dynamic range photography is the way that we see things with our eyes and our brains, because our brains typically fill in the blanks, a lot of the blanks, right? So the way that we see things and the dynamic range of, say, looking at that window, if I open those shades and the insides of this room, most cameras would have a problem rendering the inside of the room and the brightly lit California outside at the same time. But my eye can. So I can look inside and outside and I just feel like I'm seeing correct. But with a high dynamic range, it kind of jumps between that or fills in the blanks to more accurately simulate what your eye would perceive. In other words, so now you can take a photo of that window and have a properly exposed interior and exterior where the camera can't see that natively in a single frame. Is that fair? Is that a fair description?
That's in the photography context, beautiful. Yep, that's exactly. Like we already kind of talked about the old way, the 3D space that uses it, and they still do, of course. But from a photographer's standpoint, it's exactly right. Is if you're looking and if you can see Frederick's background right now, yeah, if you open the windows and try to take a photo of that, the camera couldn't capture the whole thing. Maybe now with the shades drawn, but if you open it up, you wouldn't be able to see the view and the interior in most scenes. Now, sometimes there's tons of windows and maybe it lights up the space. And maybe you don't want to get the whole dynamic range. Maybe you want heavy shadows. Maybe that's what you're going after. That all depends. Like I always want to, actually I'll hold on to that for a second, but you're right. You want to take a shot of that scene. And I always like to say real estate photographers don't get enough credit because it's really pretty hard to capture everything. So you'll take bracketed sequence of slow shutter speed up to faster shutter speed to capture the interior and exterior and everything in between, not just the extremes. And then you'll need to use software, and there are various softwares offering HDR now, but like Photomatix is kind of the granddaddy, as I was mentioning, and the most mature and I'll pat myself on the back, well supported. That one of those softwares to help you put it together. And one reason that real estate photographers don't get enough credit is that you have to control the color too, because color is part of luminance is part of color. So when you're taking the different shutter speeds, different luminance, then you have to manage that sometimes. So, and then you have various light sources, the sun's coming in, man-made lights inside, another thing to deal with. And, but yeah, that's what photographers would use it for. And that applies, of course, to landscapes is a classic situation for that. A lot of, like I said, the 360s. And the way I look at it is it's a tool in your toolbox, because just bringing it around to what I consider to be the current state of HDR is it was born, people got excited about it. For some reason, there became this certain look that everybody said, that's an HDR look. Mm-hmm. And so for years...
Oh, I know that reason. That reason has a name. His name was Trey Radcliffe.
Yeah.
That was Trey Reason for HDR. Radcliffe was his name.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, he did take beautiful photographs. He didn't just rely on a look. So that's, to be fair with him, he did better. But for sure. Oh, and also to be fair, it's easy to get that look. So people thought that was what it was supposed to be, because it's kind of like at least it used to be sort of a default when you first open up your combined bracketed photos. So maybe I should say what you do is take those bracketed photos like we mentioned, various shutter speeds. Photomatics will put it together, create that 32-bit file that we talked about before, the one that you can't really view because it's really more about lighting information.
Mm-hmm.
And then the real power, well, there's a lot of power that goes into creating that 32-bit file, because one of the strengths of Photomatics is it can really, it will keep all of the dynamic range that you give it in that 32-bit file. So whether it's your place there, if I'm eyeballing it, if you open the windows, I'm saying that's probably 9, 10, 11 stops worth of dynamic range, just because I've been doing that a lot. The eyeball is supposedly about 21 stops, I think we can see. I think that's what they say. Mm-hmm. Cameras claim to do up to like 14, but I've tried tons and tons of things. And the way I look at it is, maybe it's kind of like measuring the car's miles per gallon under perfect situation, under all kinds of controls, and my car
literally your mileage may vary, right?
Yeah, I mean, my car shuts off at a stoplight just to save, and it drives me crazy. That can't be good for the starter. But anyway, what I'm saying is that those 14 stops, and this is opinion, I would love to hear if people are getting 14 stops of usable dynamic range out of one shot, because it's not usable. It doesn't look, it's not, that's the only word I can really think of. I just haven't had to found a way to take a single shot that would show all the dynamic range of just even an interior living room or something with a view.
Because with that dynamic range, the promise is, hey, you don't have to bracket anymore. You could just since my camera can record all this dynamic range, just shoot one photo and then run it through a Photomatics right, and then have it just take a single image and make an HDR photo out of it, right?
Well, someday, I mean, it'll come time where you don't need to combine the brackets. You're right. That day will come. I mean, again, I can see what's going to happen eventually. I don't know when it's going to happen well, but it'll get there. And there are different companies trying different sensors that take simultaneous multi-shot. I was reading about one of them. Canon has a couple different things. One of them is for video, so it's not really what I'm so much into, but it's not ready for any of us to use it anytime soon. And then there's another one where it takes multiple shots simultaneously, but then I think that one, and it's still under what I was reading anyway. I don't know if it's the newest thing, the newest article, but it was what happens often with like other types of creative ways to use sensors is that you end up, when it takes 3 shots at once, it ends up 1/3 of the resolution. So that's a natural trade-off. Plus, I will throw out, I don't know if we'll talk about tips later, but I'll throw out my first one just because I mentioned it already, is it's a big disservice to think that you just take 3 shots every time, because the number of shots you need to cover a scene the number of brackets you need to cover a scene depends on the scene. So
right.
People always talk about you take 3 shots. Well, many times that's plenty. But that's one of my first, one of the tips I've been talking about for years and years is meter the brightness of the brightest parts and then meter the darkest areas and choose your bracketing properly to capture the whole thing.
See, that's the one thing you're going to scare photographers with, and that's the M word, right? Meter. You're like, no one wants to meter. Like, I have this supercomputer that I spent $5,000 on, and now you're telling me I have to meter too. You know, that's that.
Well, Frederick, I'm sorry. I thought the TWiP audience were photographers, but maybe
I know. I love meters. I have incident meters. I have Seiconic flash meters. I love the control that meters give you. I'm just saying a lot of people don't, right? They don't understand, either they don't understand meters, or they feel like they can just eyeball it, or I'll just take a test shot and then, adjust from there.
All of those are, I encourage all of those ways of doing it. It depends. It always depends, right? Whatever you do, like we were doing a Q&A show on one of the competitors over there, and I wanted to call it the It Depends podcast, because every answer is it depends, right? And so for instance, if I'm doing quote unquote walking around photography, maybe I'm on a vacation or something like that, a lot of times I'll have my camera set to 3/20th of a second with bracketing set on, and then I'll just, because I don't want to spend time messing around with the camera because maybe I'm with the family or something like that, and I'll just over bracket. I'll just shoot because I know everything's covered. I know I can handhold at that speed with the brackets, with the slower brackets. I know that it'll cover everything and more, and I'll have a lot of wasted brackets, but that's part of the plan. So there are all kinds of ways you can do it. And I encourage people to, this is one of the things that happened before, like Trey, you mentioned, he's known as an HDR photographer. Now he's a special case. He can get away with it because he has his great work.
Yeah.
But being an HDR photographer, I think that's a huge mistake. You have this, like I started to allude to, I think before, is you have this tool in your toolbox. I'm not talking about even necessarily Photomatics, but that's, the app is it's a great app, but the tool is bracketing and then using that technique.
Right.
So it doesn't mean that you need to bracket at everything you shoot. I call it bracketitis. When I had it early on, I discovered it, and I thought, wow, I can just bracket this and I'll get a photograph that wasn't there. But if the photograph isn't there, it's still not going to be there with bracketing. You need to be a photographer. Now, the tool is to solve the problem of lighting. So if you're in a situation and you don't want to, or you can't, or whatever, light the scene, like the old solution, or currently you can still do this in that your room that we're talking about, you can set the camera to capture the exterior bright areas and light up the interior, right? With actual strobes or hot lights or whatever. But that's not always the way you want to go. Maybe you don't have time. Maybe you don't have the know-how. Maybe you're whatever it is. If you have an assistant and half the day for architectural shoot, great. You have all the options, but many of us don't. And so that's just one, it's just one of the tools. And I just discourage someone from being known as like an HDR photographer.
It'd be like a cook. Yeah. I am an Instapot cook. I only I specialize in Instapot or any other tool that you'd find in the kitchen, being known for being able to just use the heck out of that tool. But there's a lot of other things that you could, when the reality is you're a cook that sometimes uses an Instapot, right? If the recipe calls for it.
I have this one pan. It's a 10-inch pan, and I can make anything you want that fits in that pan.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that a good analogy? I don't know.
It is. Yeah, that's my world. It's just that pan. Just before we move on to the Photomatics software and the updates, I want to talk a little bit about just to put a period at the end of the sentence on the technique stuff. So you talked about like the normal use, or the, I don't know if you'd call it the pedestrian use of HDR, and that's like real estate photography to more closely approximate what we see with our eyes, right? It's not the sexy, hyper-saturated, ultra psychedelic type look HDR. It is the more restrained version of it that you don't even, if you know that there's been HDR, the technique's been run on the image, and you failed, right? It's all about, let's make it look as real as possible. On the other side, it's, hey, look at downtown Tokyo exploding with color, right? That's the other side of it, right?
Right. You can, and I'm really glad you brought that up, is exactly, I at least for me, and again, this is back in the 360 times, my goal was always realism. And before there was known as a look, actually when the look first came out, everybody kind of went, oh, that's really cool, but it should have just gone away. But we always go for realism. There's no reason to have any look that says that's HDR. That you're exactly what you said. You just want someone to see the image or images and go, that's the image that I wanted. Whether it's art, that's beautiful. Whether it's real estate, that's realistic depiction of the home. Whatever it is, we're not going for a look. We're going for a real photo. We're looking for a photo, and that's what we have all these tools. You might plan your shoot. Like I checked out you had a guest on from Photopills. Love that app. Mm-hmm. If you're gonna have an epic photo, you got to plan for it. So Photopills can help. Weather apps, I don't know, whatever your planning process is. Then when you're shooting, you have tools, right? You might have lights, you might not. You might have clamps and, besides the cameras and lenses and tripod tools, you might have a remote shutter release. You might have tape. These are tools, right?
Yeah.
And then the processing has tools too. So it's all to create something that you want to create. And if you want to create the look, great. If you're another one of those people that can have a body of work that has that look, I have no problem with that. But a lot of us are going for realism, and it's totally possible. I know that there's a reputation of having that look, but it's unfortunate, but it doesn't need to be that way. There's no reason to get that.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Very good. So let's transition into Photomatics, right? Which like you said is the granddaddy of HDR or high dynamic range imaging processing applications out there. It was the beginning. It's been around. We've seen apps come and go and change direction and change focus and all the things, and Photomatics has kind of been the stay the course HDR app that you can rely on. It's been so slowly, from my perspective, it's just been slowly iterating and improving, not radical shift in direction, not radical change of the app, just like, what can we make better? What can we make better? What can we make better? What's better now? What has been changed for this latest update?
The latest one, like you're alluding to, it's been around a long time, kind of quietly. There was a big innovation, then there was small innovation, there's a big innovation. And so I think I was really thinking, I'm considering that. So I don't know, did we just get talking, and I sometimes forget if we, as we're recording this, there's a new version out today. So whenever this goes out, it will be out for some days. And is Photomatics Pro 7. And I like to look at it as, I pitched this to the kind of the boss over there. It's like, maybe we should talk about it as a version that has come from popular requests.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's like, I would say, evolutionary, not revolutionary. So it's, we've been doing this a long time, and it's very mature and has all the tools you need already. So the updates for this one, the biggest one is in batch processing. So normally when you batch process, you say, here is my folder or folders, or here are all my source images, one way or another. You choose what settings you want to apply to all of them, and then you click run, and you come back when it's done. And then there's other innovations, like it can figure out which photos go together, which do you have, these three are a set, these 5 are a set, these 7, it can figure that out. It can detect that for you. And then there was a new method that you can apply to the same sets of photos, many different kinds of results all together all at once. Mm-hmm. And now this latest version has a way of, you just drag out, like if I come back from, let's say, a real estate shoot, which is really popular for this crowd, or maybe you come back from a trip, and you just grab your images, drag them onto Photomatics, onto the icon of the window, and it'll start showing you each set in a preview. So you can choose the settings either quickly or slowly. So just zoom through and say, this set, let's say I do all my interiors. So this set, I can have this preset, or I can adjust the settings. Presets are really a starting point. You should kind of get close, and then you should tweak for your own settings from there. And then you go through each one, bing, 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 choose next. A lot of times you probably won't even need to change it because they're from the same similar scene, and then run the batch. So that's the biggest one on this one, is a workflow kind of a change, upgrade. Yeah. And you can do that either through just, if you shoot RAW, quote unquote shoot JPEG. I always say that everybody shoots RAW. It's just that JPEGs are converted instantly in the camera.
That's right. That's exactly right.
That's another thing too, is I always encourage, again, workflow is a big thing. Certain kinds of projects, taking the time for the RAW conversion isn't worth it, because those JPEGs, if you're going to combine them anyway, can be fine, can be absolutely fine. And it all depends, again, how you're shooting. I'd like to shoot RAW and JPEG myself. And then if I mess something up, then I can grab the RAWs and maybe change the colors.
Why not? Right? Yeah, why not? It's there. The RAW, we've been saying this since RAW was first popularized. I mean, it's been around since digital cameras, but since it was first popularized, that the raw file represents the best that your camera can offer for that scene. So it is the best that sensor could record of that scene. If you shoot JPEG of that very same scene, then algorithms are jumping in there and throwing pixels away and making decisions for you based on what it thinks that scene should look like, right? Yeah. And then that's what gets written to the card versus giving you the analogy I used to use when I used to teach this was the raw file. Like if you're baking a cake, the raw file are all the ingredients sitting there to bake the cake with the recipe to bake the cake. The JPEG is the cake already baked, right? Take it or leave it. You can't unbake it.
It's hard to go back and add a few more, a little bit more sugar, isn't it? Yeah,
that's right. That's right. Absolutely.
I like that analogy because I don't know if it's the raw is just the best. It's more like all. It's like you said about the cake. It's undecided. You can change a lot of things still. Where the JPEG has it, well, baked in, and that it's very difficult at that point. Like the main one would just be the white balance, right? If once you have a JPEG, is really you're going to have to do some heavy lifting to really change color significantly, and it might end up with a lot of artifacts and other problems. Where the raw is just a click of a button and you can still choose it. And so that's why I keep them until I know I don't need them anymore. Yeah.
Well, from a Photomatics HDR standpoint, who would you say your target customer is? Is it the folks that are doing realistic, like the real estate, et cetera, people, or is it the fantasy people that are doing hyper realistic scenes?
Well, they're both. I mean, like I say, it's been around a long time, and I'm kind of curious to know how many. I have some sense of how many people who is it 20 years yet? Might be since the very, very first plugin, might be 20 years. I'm not quite, I should look that up, but during all that time, how many people are using it is an enormous number. And in all different ways. Some people might use it, I don't know, once a year. Someone might use it 3 times a day if they go shoot 3 houses in a day. And so someone might use it for the once a year, might be from a vacation. I get, I see, and I'm one of the people that replies to support requests, especially if it's direct photography questions. And I get a lot of people that say, I just came back from a trip and then fill in the blank. And maybe they pulled out Photomatics for the first time in a while, right? And so it's like, I'm trying to do this. So you have people who use it once in a rare while, and they have people that use it many times a day. I know a guy who is working on a course, and he's showing that you can. Let me see here. I saw parts of it, but it's not. His pitch for his course is that I'm going to go shoot 3 houses today, but when I get home, I'll be done. So he's running processes in the car from one house to another, using Photomatics and other things, not just that. It's not a one, you can't just, like some marketing places will say, you can't just process a house worth of photos with a couple of clicks. That's not how it is. Right. But he has a down where he has a shooting style and he has a processing style. And by the time he gets to the next house, he's uploading the results from the last house. Wow. So you have all these extremes, and so many people are using this quietly. And again, like you said, that it's the point is that you can't tell exactly how the workful was.
Yeah. Or why it looks great. It's like, wow, this photo is amazing. I just,
And another thing, like here, I'll really show my true colors and to a certain amount, also the colors of like HDR soft too, is that we're like not the marketing people. And listen, real estate photography is imperfect. So you can, with those automatic processes, and believe me, I've tried them all, and I've never been happy for my own work to run all automatic. I really do need to spend a little bit of time, even if it's a couple of seconds per shot. Maybe it's usually a little more, but with post-processing. So once I get my Photomatics results, I'll still post-process. So another mistake I think people make is they think they're going to get their final result right out of it, where I still want to do things like, if I'm using like Adobe Camera Raw / Lightroom or whatever, I'll want to adjust the black and white sliders first, just to establish those where I want the shadows to be, kind of recover. Is one way to think of the process of the HDR process is after you've had that combined, those bracketed photos are combined into that 32-bit file. The process that is termed tone mapping is how you take that 32-bit file and crush it down into something that's viewable on it. So it's like, we did decide this is photographers watching, right? So
I can one or two.
So I can just think of it as the histogram that you see there. That 32-bit file has take that regular histogram and it's much wider, hugely wide histogram, as much histogram as you need to include all of the lighting levels of that scene, dynamic range of that scene. And the process of tone mapping is to put it into a regular histogram. As we know, if it's blocked up against the right, then you're losing highlights, and the opposite for the left for losing shadows, right?
Yeah.
So the tone mapping is to get it all back in there. And so the reason I mentioned that is that a lot of times it gets done a bit too well, and then you don't have everything is you're missing your shadows, and that's the soul of the photograph, right? Is the shadows, right? I think is right. The way I remember. Is that a Rick Salmonism? I think.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And who else said that? Jake Hicks also said something very similar, with regard to colored gels. You introduce color into the shadowed areas, right? So,
well, that's another level.
He is on another level.
In fact, that's some of the conversations I have is that people say, why does my scene why does it look so soft? And it's actually not that it's soft or out of focus. It's just that you don't have any shadows.
Yeah. Or contrast.
You got to crush a little bit of that shadow area. And so bringing it back is one of the things. And now, yes, if you go one by one, you can make those decisions when you're tone mapping an individual image. You can really refine it. But if I'm running a batch and I'm getting very, very close, I still need to go through and tweak. So to answer your question, yeah, there's a lot of people using it a lot of different ways. And if I can just tell from people's responses and
so how does Photomatics play with raw files generated by mobile devices like iPhones? So I'm guessing it doesn't matter, or does it?
I have not experimented with iPhone RAW in Photomatics yet. I'll do that.
Look at that. Woo, you heard it here first. And then the second question is, as we sort of wrap up this segment of the interview, and by segment, folks that are listening, I mean, Ron Pepper, as part of that arm twisting process I did, has agreed to do a Photomatics demo for us. So obviously, if you're listening to the audio podcast of This Week in Photo, that will make no sense to you. So we're going to record that separately and put that on thisweekinphoto.com and also on our YouTube channel, of course. And you can enjoy that there. So, but
if I don't do it, my arm is never going to be the same.
It's never going to be the same. Yeah. I'll have to remove it.
No, go ahead. I just I think it's like Google Alerts or something. I got news came across that apparently the Super Bowl is going to be broadcast in HDR. Is that
really? Oh, I don't know.
Will this come out before the Super Bowl?
This will come out before the Super Bowl. Yeah. And I don't know. I don't have an HDR television, so that goes right over my.
I guess that's kind of why, I put a little note about it. Like, should I bring it up? Because this is one of those things where we're seeing the term HDR. Hey, much like some other terms we mentioned earlier in this same conversation, they get thrown around very willy-nilly.
Yeah. Well, AI, for example, and machine learning and all the things, all that.
Some other time we could go down, because again, I'm a photographer, but I do talk to engineers of software, and I had a long conversation about what really does AI mean. And this was in the context not of like a Chat GPT and stuff. This is in the context of photography software. And so maybe some other time we could talk about that a little bit, because
absolutely. Oh yeah. I'd love to record that.
It's again, just not really the way we think it is. We don't, And so the same thing, like when there are HDR TVs coming out and Netflix is broadcasting HDR and the Super Bowl. Well, that's not even really what we're talking about.
Right. It's different. Yeah.
They're talking about the display.
Yeah.
and we're talking about creating something that's
Yep.
a high dynamic range scene. When I'm there shooting the scene, it's high dynamic range because like we said, the camera can't handle it in one shot. That's
Yeah.
all we're talking about, is that high dynamic range. Maybe we could call it, maybe we could come up with some new terms here and say higher than your camera can handle,
Yeah.
because
Yeah. Or
that's
the
what we're trying to solve. So
yeah, we'll call it the like your eye technique. It's just, you know, it's just like your eye sees.
when you view a photo, now there are some exceptions to what I'll say, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But when you view a photo, for all 99% of us on our computers, on our phones, or whatever, there's nothing HDR about it now. It's a photo. It's still a
Yeah.
photo. Or if you print it, it's just a photo. And it's viewed in the same ways with the same RGB and the same everything else that every other photo. It's just the process it took to get there. The scene was dynamic range, and there was some processing that uses terms like 32-bit and all that, and tone mapping. But what you see there is not an HDR photo. Is that a weird thing to say? Like,
No,
if you're
no,
looking
it's
at
not.
it,
It's just,
it's not
it's
an HDR
terminology.
photo.
Yeah, it's
a photo.
terminology.
Yeah. So I just love to get people past some of the terminology problems or whatever. I don't know. It's not really a problem. Call it whatever you want, of course, but
Yeah, it would just be accurate. Yeah, no, I get it. Well, the other side of my question was like with and I know I know you, and you're going to experiment with that iPhone HDR stuff, but the iPhone in general, you know, the iPhone, for example, can shoot in RAW. Is there going to be a Photomatics version that will run on an iPhone at any point so that I can shoot and process directly on a handheld device?
Go to the App Store and look up Real Estate Camera, and that's by HDR Soft. It's a high dynamic range. It's actually a camera app, not a processing app. And for iOS, like for iPad, they're planning on it. Is all I really know. I don't know. I do talk to the engineers, but I don't sit in the meetings and know what's coming when. But yeah, there is. In fact, you can even go to the FAQs on HDR Soft, and it says, "Is there an iPad coming? Excuse me. Is there an iPad app coming?" It says, "Yep. Send us your ideas."
Oh, good.
So yeah,
Very cool.
That is another thing. I don't know why people want to edit on an iPad, because Apple makes things look so good that you don't know if your image looks good or if it's just displaying it really well. So I don't really know why people want to do their processing on there necessarily.
That's a whole nother conversation, right? Because that is valid, but considering how many iOS devices are floating around on the planet, you could argue that that's the default, right?
Yeah.
And you want to make it look good in that.
If everyone's going to look at it on a great device, then sure, but you just don't know that. And I don't know about you, but I went through all this time of calibrating screens and getting everything right, so it looks good in any case.
Well, you know, my friend, a lot of technologies are taking jobs away. So a lot of the things that we learned in the beginning, no one really gives a crap about anymore. You know, so computers are handling a lot of it.
At this point, no matter, things are getting better. All the technology is getting better. The devices are getting better. We're getting better.
Yeah,
it's still just not automatic to go do, even like I was already. I'm trying to weird little. I was trying to make it sound like, what do you call that? Like is that not a humble brag? It's a self-deprecating. I was trying to say like that. Like, you don't have to go for perfect in the case of real estate. This is what I kind of consider architectural and real estate to be different, is the amount of time you put in and the perfection. And this is kind of the difference to me. But you still want that real estate. The expectations are high. And I'm in the Bay Area, where the clients, meaning the real estate, our clients, are way more sophisticated, and they know what they're looking for. And they're going to say that they have these expectations. So the expectations keep going up. But like I say, we keep getting better, but also the tools to keep getting better. And there's no job disappearing yet, man. It still takes a lot of expertise to do all of these things. And I don't know the timing of when it'll become so automatic that anybody can do it. Eventually, yes, but we're not too close to that yet.
Well, that's a question I'm going to throw at Rob Maroto, who is a photographer you put me in touch with. I'm going to be interviewing him, I think, next week about real estate photography, and I think he uses Photomatics as well
Yeah,
as his tool of choice. Yeah,
that's
so
how I met him through that process, and he's putting out a course. We'll give a little teaser. He has a course. I think it's officially out now, but he's been working on it. And I have learned from this guy. He's got a lot of great techniques that are bringing up the level of real estate photography. And so yeah, you'll really like talking to him.
cool.
Yeah, yeah. And I
Cool.
think that anybody interested in not just real estate photography but architectural and he does other things, of course. But anybody interested in those kinds of things, I think will really like an interview with him. Yeah.
That's cool. Well, as we wrap up this segment of the discussion, any parting thoughts you want to throw out there to the TWiP listeners?
Let's see. What do we leave hanging there? Well, the best thing to do is for other new features. I just kind of went off on the batch, but
Oh yeah, yeah.
some of the things like people have been asking to say, like one of the issues when you combine bracketed photos is things moving in the scene, and then they don't, like, we call it ghosting. So if somebody's walking through your scene, or cars or a bird or moving trees, and even when you go bang 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 for your bracketed shots, then things are moving about, so you have deghosting. So that's one of the things. You can have that done automatically. You can choose the areas. There's a lot of ways to deal with that, and again, that's one of the reasons that this is such a grown-up, mature product, is it offers a lot of ways to handle different situations. And one of the things people would have been asking for is, how can we save this information so that if I need to go back and adjust it, then I can do that. Because once your 32-bit is made, then you're sort of, that part gets baked in. But so anyway, there's a way to save those and load them again. And there's some other new features, but I would just recommend going right to hdrsoft.com, hdrsoft.com. And we've got videos and lists of what's new. You can see it all in action better than listening to me describe it. You can see the Mark with his dulcet voice describing those, and with some screen shares too. So you can see those live there. It's also free to download and try if you don't have a license. It's a free upgrade for a lot of the customers. It would be quite a few years ago. You would have had been around for quite a few years before you'll be asked for to buy an upgrade, but some will.
Yeah.
And let's see, what else do we leave hanging? Anything else?
You know what I find interesting while you think about that? I find interesting that a lot of the players in the photography software space have immediately jumped on to the AI bandwagon, right? They're releasing software and it has all these AI features. Even Adobe, right, has Sensei and all these different things that it can do using AI or different flavors of AI. I haven't seen that from Photomatics. Right, I haven't seen the Photomatics jump on the HDR or the crypto, but the HDR train or any of these sort of trendy technologies that pop up. And I'm guessing that's intentional, right? Because it's a slow and steady company.
Well, yeah, there's that alludes to, and since this is just me talking and not necessarily like anything, I'm not really that official.
Yeah.
Like, well, first of all, I would love to, if they would take like a Bitcoin as payment, I would love to help set that up. That's a whole one thing. And then the AI, we had this conversation about it, and I can just describe it really quickly. I think is that with AI, there's nothing that's intelligent. Intelligence, not the word. There's no logic. There's no figuring things out. That's what people do. AI just looks at what it's seen before and acts upon what it's seen before. That's all. So in a lot of ways, there's already AI built into Photomatics and every other software, because that's how logic is built. And that's how, I'm not sure if I use that term quite right, but that's how many software functions comes from. Not all, of course, but that's what you do. So alignment is a good example. It's seen this situation before, so it knows how to handle it now. That's all it is. It's not figuring it out. It's not iRobot like people think. So it's a lot of it's a marketing term. Now, I'm not taking away from the power of machine learning, because you can throw a lot of situations at a machine and it can, therefore it has seen so many things before that it can act correctly. So I'm not taking anything away from that, but it's still a bit of a marketing term to think that it's just intelligently figuring out what to do in this situation. That's what we do. That's what the humans do. So,
Yeah.
So it's already happening, even though, no, that's one thing that HDR Soft won't do is go use it as a big marketing thing. That's not their style.
And
nor
I
mine,
appreciate that. I
nor mine.
appreciate that.
That's why I get along so well, because we're all like very serious about the product and supporting it, and not, you're not going to get an announcement of a opportunity to pre-order. You're not going to get all this kind of stuff from us. That's
Vaporware.
Yeah. And that's where I say us, because I totally agree with all that. Well, no, even if it's real, an announcement of an announcement, first of all, is, and then pre-order this. And I'm not saying that it's illegitimate. I'm just saying it's crazy.
This is a different way of doing stuff. And are you, is the purchase price for Photomatics, is that a one-time purchase or is that a subscription?
Yeah, no. Just to be accurate, there is a, what's the word? Like I'm losing the right word, but there's a subscription service for server-based kind of services. So there's that's from almost all of us. It's $99 for the app, $129 for the bundle, and it's a one-time purchase, never expires. And if you bought version 6, so this is version 7 just out now. If you bought version 6, it'll be a free upgrade. If you bought version 5 or before, it'll be $29. So all super reasonable. And that's one thing about being slow and steady, is that there's not a lot of updates all the time. So it would be many years ago that you bought anything if you're now asked to purchase. So,
yeah. Interesting. Cool, man.
It's always really generous. They've always been a real generous company with that kind of thing, and customers come first. And I like to say that there are people that love and hate HDR, but side note, it's because of that look. So I'm just saying that
you're right.
You don't have to have the look. You don't have to have halos, the things that people don't like about it. That's just because, well, there's just ways to not have that. It's just not, none of my stuff is halo.
That was a trend as someone pushed. It's just like, hey, I no longer like that, what did you say, a 12-inch skillet or whatever? I no longer like skillets because a friend of mine kept making steak in it.
Yeah, right. Hey, I like this analogy. This analogy is going well.
Yeah, I know. They work.
The one thing that, we're always very customer oriented. And so even if people aren't into the HDR for whatever reason, and whether it's real or not, I don't want to tell you what to think, but no one has any problem with the company. It's always a very respected, I think, and professional group. So, always kind of customer first. So with that, you can even send support at hdrsoft.com for questions about any of the stuff we talked about. If it's photography related, it'll probably be me. Excuse me. It will probably be me that responds.
Yeah.
And otherwise, but any other questions about upgrades and stuff, we'll help you out.
Awesome. Ron Pepper, thank you, sir, for coming on. Congratulations on this piece of software that is, I think a lot of people have built businesses on Photomatics and are making a good living just from the app, right? So, yeah, thank you for doing that. I can't wait to see what's next, slow and steady. And if you're a photographer and you're doing any kind of work like this in the industry, then this is a no-brainer app that needs to go in your bag. Like you mentioned before, apps like Photo Pills. If you're traveling and doing landscape photography, you just need the app, right? It needs to be on your phone. This one needs to be on your computer. If you're going to be doing this kind of stuff with any level of efficiency or professionalism. So
it's almost like sometimes you want to tell someone to take the help, right? Like if you can handle something, you can find other ways to figure out the weather and the sun's position, and you can do your own layering and masking out and do HDR on your own, but take the help.
Yeah, exactly. You bought the expensive computer that can handle it, right? Just use the tools that you have to get back to the thing that you love doing, which is taking photos, right?
Yeah. I just want to drop one thing that I always kind of like to mention if I start talking about the Photomatics product is I've seen a lot of reviewers and a lot of things, and that they miss one thing. It's, if you don't see the kind of results you're looking for, probably they're there, that there are quite a few different methods. Like, I don't know if I get the terminology quite right, if it's algorithms or the engine, but there are quite a few different engines that handle the tone mapping in completely different ways. And the whole purpose is to have a lot of options of what kind of results to get. So if you're not getting what you want to get, you can ask us, but you can also just try the different methods. And there are pop-up boxes in the top left and the top right to filter and choose different methods. And there's just so many options that I just hate to see someone say, well, I looked at it and there are only a handful of options, so I just didn't keep doing it. There are a ton of options. And I realize that, they try to keep it a simplified process where that just shows you the window that you need to see at any given time. But that's because there are a lot of options, and I just hate to see people miss that fact. So.
Very cool. All right. Well, leave it right there. Like I said, folks, we're going to end this interview. So thank you for coming by. We're going to start the other demo, which is going to be this guy going through Photomatics and just showing us how it all works and what some of the new features in the new software are. So check that out right after this video on the YouTube channel and at thisweekinphoto.com. And with that, we'll leave it right there. Ron Pepper, thank you, man. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Frederick. That was fun.
This is TWiP.